years of life came tests and trials, and nights when tears replaced the smile. Though God was right there all the while, my soul was not at rest. But I lived to tell that I made it through. So instead of singing about the blues, I bring you news to encourage you. He's never failed me yet. Like the three Hebrew boys that day, all forced to take their faith to flames, I too have had the choice to break and serve the world instead. But I stood on the word and did not bow, endured the steps the Lord allowed, came out stronger, shouting wow, God never failed me yet.
I had to start with that song because he's never failed me yet. Before I start this is an incredibly sensitive subject that everybody has really, really strong opinions on. This is only, and all of these are only my testimony on these issues, but they are also still very real things that happened to me. Okay. In May of 2019, I was just feeling a little weird, just taste of like pennies in my mouth. My boyfriend at the time said, go ahead and take a pregnancy test. And as soon as I took it, just bright red, just yes, you're very, very pregnant. And I thought that was weird because I still had a few days before my period was even supposed to start. I told him about it and we started talking. We knew that what we had been doing was wrong. We knew that we were ill prepared to take care of a child, but we decided to just pray about it, pray and talk to God and really communicate with each other as well and find out what the best course of action would be. I, had gone to work, and at work I wasn't feeling quite right, and I ended up passing out at work. So they called the ambulance and had them take me to the hospital, and the doctor came in and did some lab work, and he said, well, you're aware you're pregnant? I said, yes. He said, okay, well, we just want to, kind of do an ultrasound and see, make sure there's nothing weird going on with the pregnancy part. And the doctor came back just with a really confused look on his face. And I asked him if everything was okay, and it looked like he was trying to figure out how to tell it to me. Now, normally I don't have that issue with doctors, they usually are just flat out and they tell you. But he had a really confused look on his face, and he said, well, you're pregnant with twins. Oh, okay. And I figured that wasn't enough for him to have that look on his face, so I figured there was more, and he said, we're still looking at it. And I said, okay. So he transferred me to the OBGYN department, and I met with another doctor. The first question out of that doctor's mouth was, are you doing any IVF? Have you had any IVF treatments or anything, any assisted pregnancies or anything like that? And I said, no, not at all. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were, this was an accident. He said, he kept pushing it. I remember, are you sure? Like I was, not telling the truth. And I said, no, we're not doing any of that. So he said, okay, well, let me just shoot it straight to you. You have something called a heterotopic cervical pregnancy that happens, to give you an idea, heterotopic pregnancies make up less than 1% of all pregnancies. They're extremely rare. Heterotopic pregnancies are extremely rare. Heterotopic cervical pregnancies make up a small percentage of the 1% of pregnancies that are heterotopic. So they don't happen very often. So I asked him what a heterotopic cervical pregnancy was. He said it's where you have simultaneous intrauterine and an extrauterine pregnancy. So you have twins, but one is in your uterus and one is not in your uterus where it's supposed to be. It's actually on your cervix. I need to go back because in the emergency room, when that first doctor came in and told me I was pregnant with twins, all that doubting and uncertainty that I experienced before, trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to really have that, went out the window. When he said you're pregnant with twins, I was like, okay, we're having these. And I had already been experiencing so much so early that I was already developing an attachment and a love for these babies. And so when he told me that, I had already decided that I loved them and I wanted to have them. When they told me what type of pregnancy it was, and that it was cervical and that kind of thing, I said, okay, well, fix it. I don't think I really understood at the time what was really happening. So they admitted me and brought another doctor. Now, mind you, I'd had about 4 doctors in the course of like maybe 12 hours. And every one of these doctors kept saying the same thing. And in all of my, 20, 30, 35 years, I've never seen this. And that's not really comforting because you want people to be able to fix the issue. So if they keep telling you they've never seen it, that's not what you want to hear. So I had a doctor come in and she explained to me that this type of pregnancy was fatal. And what was going to happen was if the one on the cervix continued to grow, it would rupture one or more of my blood vessels in my cervix and I would potentially bleed to death. The biggest concern for them was that the pregnancy on the cervix didn't get any bigger. They told me I had an option. You have 2 options. We can terminate the extrauterine pregnancy because you can't have that baby. And you can try to have the intrauterine one, it was hard to say, or we can terminate both. Now let me explain to you the issue with trying to have the intrauterine one. If we do the surgery that none of them had ever done, if we try to do the surgery to remove the extrauterine pregnancy on your cervix, there could be damage there that would prevent you from being able to have a safe birth of your intrauterine pregnancy. Basically, she was telling me that if I try to have the one in my uterus, I might not live through that, and there's a possibility that the baby wouldn't either. They kind of left me with the decision to terminate just one and risk my life and the intrauterine baby's life, or to terminate both. I asked them for a little while to make this decision. I only really had like a few hours, maybe a day to make that decision because they were still watching the one on the cervix to make sure it didn't grow. And that's what babies do, they grow. So I didn't have much time to make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to terminate one baby or both. So that song that song I played in the beginning, He's Never Failed Me Yet. I was playing that song the entire time in the hospital, and talking to God and asking for strength and asking for wisdom as to what to do. And there's a part in that song that says, I stood on the word. I stood on the word and did not bow. I endured the steps the Lord allowed. And then I came out stronger, shouting, wow, God's never failed me yet. And the word says in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near the brokenhearted, and he saves the crushed in spirit. And he also says in 1 Thessalonians 4:14, for since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. So I stood on his word and what he said about me. In our situation, we decided that it would be best to terminate both pregnancies to save my life and to give me potentially the opportunity to maybe one day see these babies again. Like I said, I didn't have much time either to really process, kind of sounds gross, to process this decision. But even now, it was the right decision to make. I'm not sure if it will ever just not hurt. Like I said, in that ER room when he mentioned that there were twins, I had already been wrestling with, loving them already in those few early weeks. And when he said that, it solidified my decision. Here is the rough part. That was the rough part. I tell the doctor that we've decided that we are going to terminate both pregnancies, which was her recommendation anyway, because this type of pregnancy was so dangerous. Her main thing was, okay, now that we've decided that you're not going to do that, now that we've made that decision, we need to go ahead with the treatment. So I stayed in the hospital while they dosed me with something called methotrexate, which is actually a cancer medication, but they used it to reduce the size of both pregnancies. So every day they would come in and give me this high dosage of this cancer medication and monitor my HCG levels and make sure that they were dropping. So every day I was in there was just kind of supposed to be happy that I was watching my babies kind of deteriorate. And I put on for a little while, I put on a really good front. I was trying to be super strong for the people around me and tell them, hey, this is for the best, because we had all, talked about it, and it's so different for the people that are around you. It's so different for you to experience it from them. Even the man in your life, I think they don't experience it to the same level. My family came in and out, and they'd stay for a few hours every day, and all night, every night, I was It was just me and God. But I gotta tell you, in my strongest moments, the times that I felt that I was the strongest, were in those quiet moments with God where I felt like it was just me and him talking. I was so comforted. I was so comforted. I would look out that window and I would just be talking and praying. And I felt at ease those nights. But during the day, the nurses would come in, they'd give me that medication, make sure my levels were dropping. And for the first few days, my levels were dropping normally, and then all of a sudden they just stopped. And it seemed like the pregnancy in the uterus was dissolving, but the one on the cervix wasn't. It hadn't gotten any smaller. And they were concerned about it getting bigger. So they kept coming in every day, just kind of reminding me, hey, if you start bleeding, we need to run you into surgery. Every day they kept reminding me. Every time you go to the bathroom, just make sure you're not bleeding. Make sure you're not bleeding, because if you start bleeding, that you might not stop bleeding. And that was a lot to weigh on me, like, hey, if you start bleeding, you may not stop. Once they found out that the HCG levels had stopped getting smaller, before that, they kept saying, we don't want to do the surgery. None of us have ever done it. It's risky. It's dangerous. We think at like the ideal situation is that you come out with your with all of your parts, but we wouldn't be surprised if we had to do a full hysterectomy if you had to have the surgery. So that's like second best case scenario. And then, obviously you're aware of the bleeding issue that could be fatal. So that's why we don't want to do the surgery. So we really, really don't want to do that. That's a last resort. So I said, okay. But when they noticed that the pregnancy in the uterus and the cervix wasn't getting any smaller, they decided that day, when they saw that the numbers hadn't gotten any smaller, they decided that day, hey, we're gonna do surgery in an hour. After days of pumping me with high doses of this dangerous medication, telling me how super dangerous this surgery was, they say, okay, we're just gonna do the surgery, we have to do it right now. I didn't have any time again to prep my mind for the idea that I might not wake up. That's what the doctors and nurses were really, not the nurses, but the doctors were really trying to like emphasize initially. So they prepped me for surgery, and it was, again, just my dad and my boyfriend. The whole time, based on what they've told me, I'm like, okay, there's a strong possibility I'm not gonna wake up from this. Despite the fact that I had done what they had recommended to save my life, I still ended up in that scenario. They took me down for surgery. I went in thinking, okay, I might not wake up. And when I opened my eyes, I saw red tubes, and I said, okay, well, let me go back a little bit. The doctor told me that there was a strong likelihood that during the surgery, I might start bleeding a lot, and that they would have to do like a hysterectomy. So I might have to get like either a blood transfusion or some sort of blood thing. So I was ready for that. When I woke up and I saw like these red cords, I thought, oh, okay, well, my uterus is probably gone, but I'm still alive. I was extremely kind of drugged and groggy. They told me that everything went well. They told me that all of my parts were still intact and that it went very well. They took me back to my room, and I just began to heal from that. That medication that they gave me, I noticed that I had started developing some sores in my mouth. they got progressively worse. So after they discharged me, I went home and I noticed that these sores in my mouth were just getting more and more painful. After a couple of days, my mouth was unbearably sore. These huge sores in my mouth, I could barely talk well, and they were just getting worse, to the point, it had gotten to the point where I could only drink things and I could barely open my mouth completely. And even water and stuff was just burning the inside of my mouth. So I went back to the hospital. They looked at my mouth and they said, oh, okay, well, these sores are from the medication that they gave you. So I spent the next week back in the hospital, and it had gotten so severe by the time I got to the hospital that I couldn't drink anything either. So they just hooked me up to an IV, and for about 3 or 4 days, they were just giving me, the only thing that I was ingesting was the saline from the IV. They were just giving me that around the clock to keep me hydrated. And then after about, I think it was about 5 days, I started being able to drink liquids again. So I drank liquids for another week and a half, 2 weeks, and I was back on solids within a month. That was my experience with the heterotopic cervical pregnancy. I know that there are other women. When I looked up that type of pregnancy while I was in the hospital, there was nothing. There was a bunch of peer-reviewed articles and medical articles on that, but I hadn't seen it. I went on YouTube looking for anything that any person had experienced with that type of pregnancy, and I couldn't find anything. And I know that there are, even though it's extremely rare, because it's a form of ectopic pregnancy, it's an ectopic pregnancy with twins that are, one's in the uterus and one's not. And I know that there were other women that had experienced something like that, but I couldn't find anything from a personal perspective, not from like a medical journal, because those there's like 7. The blessing from that is that God kept me through it. He fortified me through it. He kept me strong through it. I know that we made the right decision because I trusted his word. I knew what we had done, because, and bear with me when I say this, in that situation, there were repercussions, I felt like, for my sin. Not the loss of the babies, because God did not make death, and he doesn't delight in the death of the living. He created all things that they might exist. That wasn't his will. What is his will is that everything under the sun give him honor and glory. That even in the midst of our pain and our torment, especially in those situations, we reach out to him. We hold on to him. Now, after all of this happened, I had to start a job within, I think, 2 weeks. It was a lot. It was a lot to go through in a short period of time. But God kept me through it. After everything that the doctors kept saying, kept drilling into my head, kept drilling and kind of trying to force me to realize, but you know what? My God is faithful. My God is faithful. If I don't see those babies again naturally, they are kept supernaturally. I guess I just wanted to reach out to any women that have experienced any type of ectopic pregnancy, any type of miscarriage, any loss of a child. The part that was hard for me was making the decision to let both of them go. That was hard because I was already loving them. My God is faithful. My God is faithful. He's faithful to his word. He's faithful to me. He's faithful to those who believe and trust in him. So I know even though those babies were not planned for that time, I do look forward to seeing them. This was hard. This was hard. But I know God was with me the whole time. And the beautiful thing was I had peace about that decision. I had so much peace about that decision. It wasn't what I wanted at the time. Glory be to God. It wasn't what I wanted at the time, but it was what needed to happen. And I really had to pray, and I had to seek counsel to find out that was the right thing. The Bible says there's wisdom in a multitude of counsel, not any counsel. I spoke with my elders, I spoke with believers, and there is wisdom in praying, believing, standing on what God said in his word, believing and trusting in his promise, trusting him beyond what we can understand or comprehend or what we can make sense of. We cannot make sense of it all the time, but he can. And I promise you, his word doesn't return unto him void. Anything that he says he's going to do in his word is done. It is done. Right now, I'm just grateful I'm thankful for the hand of God over my life. I'm thankful for the ability to come to him and to trust him. I'm thankful for the Son. I'm thankful for Jesus being the bridge between me and God, for everything that he endured on that cross, because every single thing every pain and hurt and affliction that I experienced that night, Jesus already knows. He already knows. So I pray that this bless someone today. To God be the glory.